First night of Muharram 1439 after Hijrah, and as is our custom, we begin the Muslim New Year not with celebration and rejoicing but with grieving, as we commemorate the martyrdom of the grandson of the Prophet of Islam, Aba Abdullah Sayyidus Shuhada Al-Imam Al-Husayn bin Ali alayhi afdalus salatu wassalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Sayyid ibn Tawus tells us that the sign of being loyal to the house of Zahra alayhi salam is that when the month of Muharram comes, there is a change in our lives, and that we rejoice when they rejoice and we grieve when they grieve. And we have many ahadith from the Aimma alayhimus salam that every one of our imams, as soon as the moon of Muharram was sighted, they put on black clothes, they stopped rejoicing or laughing, and they began mourning for their Jad Hussein until the day of Ashura. And they would hold majlises in their homes. So inshallah, in this spirit, we would do the same. And as part of marking these nights and commemorating them, we also seek to learn something from the teachings of Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam and promoting his message, inshallah. You have heard in the introduction that the subject that we will be discussing, inshallah, is Orthodox Islam. I would like to use tonight's majlis as an introduction and, in a sense, set out the platform on which we will, inshallah, build the rest of the nights in these 12 nights, inshallah. When we say Orthodox Islam, what we mean, at least for the purpose of this series, is that original Islam that Allah and His Messenger had intended for Muslims to follow. In a looser sense, we can define Orthodox Islam as mainstream Islam, as original Islam. The opposite of orthodox would be heterodox, and it would suggest those who are heretical and those who break away from that original mainstream Orthodox Islam. Most of us do not choose what religion or what madhab we are born into. And so for many of us, we tend to grow into the same madhab that we were born into, and we defend and believe in all those teachings. But it is a sign of maturity and a sign of sincerity that one should understand why one follows the manhaj and the madhab that they do. And therefore we want to ask this question to say, which version of Islam that we see in the world today in so many forms is that original Orthodox Islam that Allah and His Messenger had intended for Muslims and for all of humanity? It is true that over 14 centuries there is a lot of cultural incursions that have taken place and come into all the different madahib. So whether you are Sunni or Shia or any other sect of Islam, you could argue that the Islam you follow is not 100% exactly as the Islam that was introduced by Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. But we seek to understand which madhab or which manhaj or which path should we follow that would be the closest to that Islam that Allah talks about in the Quran when He says, Inna ad-dina indallahi al-Islam. And the only way to do this is obviously to engage in some sort of inter or intra-faith dialogue where we understand and we seek to understand. Now, unfortunately, when we look at the history of these intra-faith dialogue that have taken place amongst Muslims, what we find is that most of the times there have been two approaches to these dialogues. One approach is very exclusivist, that starts on the basis that I am right, you are wrong, and I can say anything about you, mock, jeer, laugh, ridicule what you believe in, because I know I am right, and if you want to follow the truth, follow it, and if you don't, I don't really care. The other extreme has been a very pluralistic approach, to say, we have been discussing the differences between us for 14 centuries and nothing has come out of it. It is about time that as Muslims we move on, and so we should stop discussing these issues. For how long will we keep talking about Ghadir and Saqifa and Badr and Uhud and Khandaq and so on and so forth? History is history. What has happened. We can't change that. But as Muslims, we are in a pitiful state in the world today, and therefore we need to look beyond history and move on. So this has been the other approach, to say, let us forget our differences and let us come together as one religion and focus on what is common between us and move on. The problem with that, as I shall demonstrate in these 12 nights, is that it actually does not resolve the problem. It just suppresses it and it festers as long as it is not discussed. And it is only a matter of time before it resurfaces. There is a third approach that I will be taking that is neither one that is high-handed, filled with hubris, nor the other that is very pluralistic and, in a sense, sweeping everything under the rug. And this approach is to say that a lot of times the misunderstandings we have amongst ourselves as Muslims is not because of what we say, but how we say it. And that we can learn as Muslims to have a very candid conversation, but one that is respectful. And this is not very difficult to understand. Supposing we had some strife and some tension in a relationship in our family, whether it is between us and our spouses, or us and our parent, or a sibling, or a child. How do you resolve these differences? Let us suppose a man and his wife have a very troubled relationship in their marriage. Supposing they decide, let us not talk about it, let's just forget about it, that there was any differences between us. Is the problem going to go away? It's not going to go away. It will stay on both minds and it will remain there, but the problem is not going to go away. Supposing they decide, let's talk about it, but the conversation is very high-handed and there's a lot of blame and abuse and pointing fingers. Is it going to solve anything? Well, it's predictable how that marriage is going to end. The only way that that relationship can be mended is if the two come together and say, look, we're both human. We both make mistakes. If we truly love each other and we want to repair this marriage, then let us talk to each other the language of love. So you both sit down, each one expresses their grievances, the other one listens to the other one, each one apologizes to the other, you seek to understand, and then you seek to be understood, and from there, that marriage can move on. The same things that were said in hostility are now being said again, but what has changed is how it is being said. In other words, I don't need to labor this point, but if we are to solve the problems in Islam today between the major sects in Islam, what is needed is this element of sincerity, of being genuine, of humility, of really wanting to reach out to each other with compassion, with empathy. And this is the language actually that the Quran teaches us. You see, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad, he is the messenger of Allah. He is sent to polytheists. he knows what he is preaching is true and absolutely true. He has no doubts, and there is not an iota of doubt in his conviction that what he has is true. But look at what Allah tells him, that when you preach to the polytheist, what should you say to them? This is Surah Saba, chapter 34, verse 24. He says, first ask them, who is it that sustains you in the heavens and the earth? Is it not Allah? And then tell them, وَإِنَّا وَإِيَّاكُمْ لَعَلَىٰ هُدًى أَوْ فِي ضَلَالٍ مُبِينٍ. And you and us, either one of us is on guidance and the other one is on misguidance. This is the messenger of Allah. He is being told, don't tell them, I am guided and you are misguided. No. Tell them one of us is guided and one of us is misguided. Come, let us talk and find out. وَإِنَّا وَإِيَّاكُمْ لَعَلَىٰ هُدًى أَوْ فِي ضَلَالٍ مُبِينٍ. This is Khatimul Anbiya. So Allah is teaching us the language we must speak. And this is not hidden from you, that unfortunately, even amongst the Shia, we have groups that have chosen to promote the message of the Ahlul Bayt in a manner that serves no purpose. For example, the setting up of satellite channels, where 24/7 all that happens is cursing. And cursing the individuals that our Sunni brothers and sisters look up to with a lot of respect. They were born into that faith and they were raised like that. Right? And then, celebrating and having a cake to celebrate the demise of Aisha, the wife of the Prophet, and clapping and dancing. And you have to question, what is the intention behind that? You see, you have to remember that as we claim to be the followers of the Ahlul Bayt, we become the face, not the face of the Ahlul Bayt, but the face of their manhaj, the face of their mission. If someone is to decide, do I want to follow the Ahlul Bayt or not, there is no imam that they can look at. So they will look at the Shia and decide, do I want to follow the Ahlul Bayt or not? So if they are indeed superior, then that superior and superiority of theirs must shine and radiate through us, because we are the face of that. And a lot of times what happens is, when people discuss this, how should we discuss polemics and differences between us? What I hear is that the debate is around the fact that it puts the Shi'as in danger. This is what you commonly hear, isn't it? When people object to those who speak out against the early caliphs, for example, or the wives of the Prophet and so on, what do they say? They say, you guys in other parts of the world go up on the pulpit and you do la'an and you talk about all these things and you talk about the caliphs. The Shias in Pakistan and Afghanistan are being killed because of your words. So the concern is being expressed is what? Security. The opposite side, those who run these satellite channels and who say we should be free and open and just say the truth because the truth needs to be said, and if we don't say it, how will our children know the truth? Their argument is what? Their argument is, they consider us to be kafir. Whether we say it or not, they're going to kill us anyway. So we might as well say it before we die. But you see, the argument is around what? The argument is about our lives and our security and the fact that we are being killed or not being killed. I want to change that perception and that conversation and say the argument is not about whether we are being endangered or not. The argument is that we have a responsibility, a taklif, to promote the Ahlul Bayt to the rest of the world. It is not about us and making ourselves feel good, that I feel good that I love Amir al-Mu'mineen so much. It is about the fact that Amir al-Mu'mineen will ask me Yawm al-Qiyamah, what did you do to introduce me to others? And therefore, when the argument is like that, then it's a no-brainer. What is the best way to introduce the Ahlul Bayt? Because the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam themselves have said that humans by their nature and fitrah have been wired to be attracted to us and to love us. You don't need to sell us to them. You simply need to introduce us to them. That's all. Let them know who Amir al-Mu'mineen is and then leave it to Allah. It's not your job to convert anyone. But you are the face, the person standing at the door that they first look at before they enter the room to be introduced to the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. So it is very important then that we, when we talk about what is the best way to approach, it is not about being validated. It is not the fact that we are in minority and we want the majority of the Muslims who are Sunni Muslims to accept us as, being Muslims and not being kafir and as being another one of, the fifth madhab and so on. It's not about validation. It's about the fact that we have to demonstrate the akhlaq of the Ahlul Bayt, and we have an obligation to actively promote and introduce them to the rest of the world. And so how do we go about doing that? And so what I will do inshallah in these 12 nights is I will take the approach as follows. The first thing I want to do is discuss the major points of contention between the Shia and the Sunni. And because I speak obviously from the perspective of a Shia, what I will do is talk about all those issues that our Sunni brothers and sisters find objectionable about the Shias. And I want to respond to those very quickly between tonight and tomorrow night, no more than 2 or 3 nights. Thereafter, I want to derive from this a yardstick to say that if we are going to identify the Orthodox Islam, the original Islam that Allah and His Messenger had intended, what should those parameters be? What should the yardstick be? How are we going to decide this is how we're going to measure to what degree are we following that Orthodox Islam? And then finally, of course, we'll be coming to understanding then what is Orthodox Islam. But what I want to also emphasize here is that the purpose of this whole discussion, because you will hear me tonight and tomorrow and in the first few nights discussing some very sensitive and contentious issues, and you will see a lot of polemics as well. And I'm going to do it as candidly as I can, but as respectfully as I can, inshallah. But I want to emphasize this, and I want you to bear this in mind throughout the series, inshallah, that the purpose of this discussion is not merely to determine which is the right path, because every side has this conviction that I am following the right path. The purpose of this discussion in determining Orthodox Islam is that I wish to also demonstrate that the cause of suffering for Muslims in the world today is directly the result of having forgotten what Orthodox Islam is. I want to show you that if Muslims are in a pitiful state today, it is because they are missing some very important ingredients that Allah and His Messenger had wanted Muslims to hold on to. So, side by side, as we determine Orthodox Islam, we want to see how this is related to the plight of Muslims. I don't need again to sell this idea to you that Muslims are in a bad state and shape today, right? You may have sometimes played this game where someone says a word and you just say the first word that comes to your mind, isn't it? Someone says cat, you say dog. Someone says apple, you say orange. Someone says blue, you say red. If you speak to a non-Muslim and you say Muslim, what is the word they're going to reply? Terrorist. Terrorist. I was going to say that, but you all said it before I did. So we are all thinking the same way. We need to change that perception. We cannot simply say, well, they are wrong and they don't understand Islam. There is something we're doing wrong, which is why that is the word that comes to their mind. Many of you work in the corporate world, and if you work in the corporate world, you usually have this department that does, surveys, right? Customer satisfaction surveys. And they have this term they use called NPS, Net Performer Score, isn't it? And if you have ever been asked to fill out a survey, you will see that any survey you fill out, there is one question towards the end, which is the primary NPS question. And the question is, would you recommend us to a friend or a colleague? Now you think that's just one question on the survey. That is the question. That is the question that all corporations use to measure how they're doing. All their bonuses are driven by that, their churn rate is driven by that, their marketing strategy is driven by that. They have a way of saying, if we get a score of 7 and above, these are our promoters. If we get a score of, less than 5 or 6, these are our detractors. These are the ones we need to go after. And then the others one are in the middle. And they have a formula they use to determine how they're doing based on this question. Now obviously Islam is not a corporation, but we need to be able to ask this question to a non-Muslim or to somebody who is newly introduced to Islam. Would you recommend Islam to a friend or a colleague? And I'm going to demonstrate to you, as you saw that the subject is in search of Orthodox Islam, the difference that Adala and Imama make. I want to demonstrate that because we have lost these values like Adala and Imama, divine leadership and justice, this is the root cause of Muslim suffering today. And these were meant to be very much part and parcel of Orthodox Islam. If you can recite the salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The first issue we need to discuss is that the general assumption in scholars and the Muslim world is that because the Sunni Muslims are the majority, therefore that is mainstream Orthodox Islam. And that the Shias are a breakaway sect from that. Now, throughout this lecture I will use the term Shia Islam, Sunni Islam. But I want to make it clear that I don't mean to suggest there are two versions of Islam, Shia and Sunni Islam. Nor do I intend to create that division. What I mean to say is that those who call themselves Sunni Muslims, they follow Islam, but they take their teachings through one set of sources. And those who call themselves Shia Muslims, when we say Shia Islam, we are referring to those Muslims who take their understanding of Islam from another source. And for the Shia, it's very simple actually. That source is none other than the household of the Prophet of Ali Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And so, even when you look at the works by university scholars and academics, you will find that there is this underlying messaging that because, and again, what is the percentages? These are the two major divisions of Islam. If you ask the Shia, they will say the Shias are probably 20%, 30% of Muslims. But we take a conservative estimate of even 10% or 15%. If you ask some of the more, some of the Sunni Muslims who are more opposed to the Shias, they will tell you the Shias are only 3% and the Sunni Muslims are 97%. Which in fact speaks to the credit of the Shia, that if the Shias today are seen as a major, alternative to Sunni Islam, then how does this 3% stand before 97%? What is it that these 3% have that the 97% do not? But this is the general understanding that the Prophet of Islam came, preached Islam, he passed away, the Muslims Ummah stayed together. And as this Ummah progressed, because they spread out to different regions, different cultures, different ideas came introduced, groups began to break away. Just like you might have one major mosque or center, and then groups break out and form smaller forms and centers. So the same idea that the Khawarij began forming and the Shias came out and formed. And when you speak to a lot of individuals, and some of these are not necessarily, Salafis or people who are just opposed to Shias. Some of these are, very sincere, very learned individuals from Sunni Islam, and I was recently reading a book by, a Sunni scholar called Abdul Hakim Murad, whose, pre-Islamic name was Timothy Winters. He's a respected academic scholar. He's translated books by Ghazali, and, he writes this same idea that the Shias and the Khawarij broke away because they were, unhappy with how things were, being run in Islam. So there's different ideas. One is that there was a Jew by the name of Abdullah bin Sabah whose main focus was cursing the Sahaba, and he started this new cult that became Shia faith. Another is that the Shia faith started as a political group, and then it slowly, crystallized into a full-formed sect with its fiqh and theology and so on and so forth. The other is the Shias were essentially an extremist group who had extremist ideas. They ascribed divinity to the Ahlul Bayt. They believed Imam Ali was divine and so on. And then with time, in order to survive, they toned down their extremism, and they took some theological ideas from the Mu'tazilites, and they borrowed and begged and took pieces from here and there, and they slowly formed into the religion that they have today. So this is the messaging. Now, we want to change that perception. And I want to argue, besides the fact that the majority does not necessarily mean that is Orthodox Islam, but I want to argue the fact that the Muslims that are majority today, they came about to be Sunni Muslims because of historic and socio-political reasons, not because of any religious or theological reason. Let me explain this. There was no major debate at some point where the Shia ulama and the Sunni ulama had this big debate, and the Sunni ulama completely trumped and defeated the Shia ulama, and then the majority went with this and the other ones were left behind. It wasn't like that. What I will demonstrate to you is that most people living in a society will follow the government of the time without standing up for any cause or fighting for anything that they see wrong in that society. Let's make it relevant and talk about the society we live in today. We live in Canada. We see a lot of things in the policies of this government that we like, that gives us the freedom, the security, the comforts, the benefits that we live in, bihamdillah. But we see things that are wrong as well. How many of us stand up and protest about it? Right? For example, the government introduces gender-specific education to very young children. And some of that teachings we know are wrong and are corrupting the minds of our children. We're very concerned. But will we go downtown and protest and write petitions and write letters? No. Why? We're busy with our lives. We have to go to work. We have to put food on the table. We have, dependents. We have responsibilities. There is no time for these sort of things. So we say, others will do it. The government is trying to legalize pot. We all know it's wrong, right? We don't want marijuana legalized. But how many of us are going to write petitions and letters? No. Right? We just let things go. The government, when we came to Canada, many of us, there was no gay marriages. Now it is legalized. How many of us said anything about it? No. If you came a long time back, maybe there was a time when Canada had capital punishment, and then they removed it. Right? You can give example after example after example. Abortion, right? Pro-life, pro-choice. We see these things happening on a day-by-day basis. You hear in the news that the government is now, the province of Ontario is going to allow alcohol and wine to be sold at the grocery stores. You don't want that. You don't want your children, when you go grocery shopping, seeing the bottles of wine and alcohol. But are you going to do anything about it? You let it go. You let this slide, you let that slide. Over a period of time, that way of life and that way of thinking becomes what is defined as quote-unquote Canadian values. And these are then infused into your children's minds, and they grow up with these ideas of what is human rights, what is feminism, what is animal rights, what is, right and wrong about the environment, what should you stand up for, what should you not stand up for. And then you speak that language. When you get on social media, you blog, you write comments to every news article, you write based on what you have determined to be right and wrong, based on what society has fed you as values. But your fathers, when they saw these first creeping in, they kept quiet. So it went, and you go with the flow. What I'm trying to say here is, this is the same thing that happened with Islam. The rights of the Ahlul Bayt, as we shall demonstrate, were usurped. They were marginalized and put aside and tormented and tortured. After the early caliphs, and particularly after Amir al-Mu'mineen, when the Umayyads came to power, they were brutally opposed to the Ahlul Bayt. And they also spread lies and rumors and fabricated false traditions to disparage Amir al-Mu'mineen and the Ahlul Bayt and to downplay their importance in Islam. And so the society grew up with those values. Now, those people for whom the caliph was Muawiyah, at that point you wouldn't necessarily call them Sunni Muslim. But they're just Muslims living in different countries. They're living in Egypt, they're living in Syria, they're living in Iraq, they've probably never seen Muawiyah, but they know there is a caliph by that name. They never met Amir al-Mu'mineen, they never met the Prophet, right? The ahadith in praise of the Ahlul Bayt have been washed away, hidden, changed, forged, right? So they don't know any better, they go with the flow. You don't protest, you have a living to do. You have to go to work, you have to provide for your family, and things go one after the other. The Umayyads' rule comes to an end, the Abbasids come to rule. The Abbasids' rule comes to an end, the Ottomans come to rule. The Ottomans rule until the First World War, Second World War, the Khilafat comes to an end, countries break up, there is now nations with borders. But for the majority of the time, when the Muslim Ummah was growing and expanding in hundreds and thousands and millions, the government was determining what is going to be the official story of Islam. And what some of these caliphs did as well, as I shall demonstrate, is they also created a sanctity around the idea of the Sahaba and said that we must not speak any ill of any one of the companions of the Prophet and create sort of an aura of infallibility around them. Why? Because if we allow investigations and discussions around them, even if they are true and honest, they might lead people back to seeing the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. And they might now also point fingers at us that we are not as good as even the Sahaba Kiram. So we must somehow make them perfect, but at the same time we are claiming titles to be Khalifa of Allah and Khalifa of Rasul. So we must bring the Prophet down as well and show flaws in his character, so that now we are worthy of being his Khalifa. Now this sounds like a conspiracy theory at this point, but I will abundantly prove this with evidence. The one advantage that the Shia Muslims have over the Sunni Muslims is that when the Shia Muslims argue their case, they bring their proofs and arguments from the Sunni sources. Because a lot of the early history, the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, were written by Muslims that you might today categorize as Sunni. So for example, Tarikh Tabari, Tarikh Ibn Athir, Tafsir Ibn Kathir, Suyuti, Ghazali, Tabaqat Ibn Sa'ad, and there is a host of them, right? Sirah Ibn Ishaq, Sirah Ibn Hisham, none of these were Shias. So we use those very same sources to argue our case. But what we argue is we say, we must not bury our heads in the sand and pretend that there was nothing wrong. We must dig this out and talk about it. Not because we want to foster division and arguments, but because that is the only way to heal and understand what we lost in the original Islam, so that we can recalibrate our compass and find the way forward and solve the plight of the Muslims today. If you can recite the salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. You see, the Quran itself abundantly argues that the majority for the most of times is wrong. If you read the Quran, the language of the Quran always condemns the majority. We're not saying that this is proof that the Sunnis are wrong, the Shias are right. But we're saying it's not an argument that because you are the majority, therefore you must be right. Consider, for example, in Surah Al-An'am, chapter 6, verse 116, it says, وَإِن تُطِيعْ أَكْثَرَ مَنْ فِي الْأَرْضِ يُضِلُّكَ عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. And if you were to follow most of those who are on the earth, they will take you away from the path of Allah. Right? إِن يَتَّبِعُونَ إِلَّا الظَّنَّ وَإِنْهُمْ إِلَّا يَخْرُصُونَ. They follow nothing but suspicions, and they're only guessing their way through. It is only conjecture. So the Quran repeatedly argues this case. Now, I'm coming close to the end of my time for tonight, but I want to discuss one more thing here, and that is the issue of what is the origin of the words Shia and Sunni. And many of you have heard this time and time again, but I want to again substantiate this from the sources of our Sunni brothers and sisters. You see, again, the perception is that there was no such thing as Shia during the time of the Prophet. And that after the Prophet ﷺ passed away and the Muslims spread out, everyone was following Islam and there was only Muslims. And then this one group broke away and they began calling themselves Shia. However, when we go back to the sources of hadith for our Sunni brothers and sisters, what we find is this is actually not true at all. The word Sunni never existed, yes, but the word Shia existed and was used by the Prophet himself, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. One very, very, very popular example that you will find in many Sunni tafasir is that when you read Surah Al-Bayyinah, chapter 98 of the Quran, verse 7, the last verse, it says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ أُولَٰئِكَ هُمْ خَيْرُ الْبَرِيَّةِ. Those who have faith and do good, they are the best of creation. Many Sunni mufassirun have reported this, that the Prophet ﷺ, when this verse was revealed, he looked at Imam Ali alayhi salam and said, "O Ali, Khairul Bariya is you and your Shia, the best of creation." And on many occasions when Amir al-Mu'mineen would approach the Prophet, he would say, "Ja'a Khairul Bariya, the best of creation has now come." In another Sunni hadith, we are told that Salama, one of the wives of the Prophet, says, "I was seated with the Prophet ﷺ, and with us was Ali and Fatima, and the Prophet raised his head and looked at Ali and said, 'Rejoice, O Ali, for you and your Shia will be in Jannah.'" This is a Sunni hadith. Now listen to this one. Al-Maghazili, Ibn al-Maghazili al-Shafi'i has a book called Al-Manaqib. It's a well-known Sunni source. He quotes a hadith from a companion of the Prophet called Anas bin Malik. Anas bin Malik says that the Prophet ﷺ said that 70,000 of my ummah will enter Jannah, will enter paradise without any hisab, without any accounting. And then he looked at Ali alayhi salam and said, "O Ali, these are your Shia and you are their Imam." This is not a Shia source. So we find examples after examples where the Prophet says to Imam Ali, when he talks about Khairul Bariya, he says, "Anta wa shi'atuka yawmul qiyamah radin mardiyin." Khairul Bariya, O Ali, is you and your Shia, you will be pleased with Allah and they will be pleased with you. Which means the verse that says, "Radiyallahu anhum wa radu anhu" is also about them. So we have lots of such examples that we find in this. Now, let me then explain how this idea came about. So, what we have understood so far is that in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there was Muslims, and within the Muslims, there was a subset and a group who were very close to Amir al-Mu'mineen, and the Prophet pointed them out as the Shia of Ali. Now this Shia of Ali, at the time of the Prophet, were not a separate group that you could say there was two sects in Islam. There was the Muslims following the Prophet and there was the Shia following Ali. No. They were following the Prophet, but amongst them, there were some who were identified as the Shia of Ali. It would be like saying amongst the Muslims, you have the Mu'mineen, you have the Muttaqeen, you have the Salihin, you have the Siddiqeen, you have the Zuhad, and then you say these were the Muttaqeen, but they were also Muslim. So they existed and were identified separately, but they're part of Islam, not a separate group. When the Prophet ﷺ passed away and the first caliph came to rule, the case continued like that. There was Muslims who were now told or following Abu Bakr as their caliph, but amongst the Muslims, there were some who were attached to Ali. They were known as his Shia. And the term Shi'at Ali remained in history. Second caliph, the same thing. Third caliph, the same thing. Now when Imam Ali became the caliph, the whole Muslim ummah followed him. Those who are following him are all Muslims. But amongst those Muslims, there was still a group that was Shia. Can you see that until this point, there is no two sects? The Shias exist, but as part of the Muslim ummah, not as a separate sect. It was only when Muawiyah contested the right of Ali and said, "No, I refuse to pay allegiance to you," that the Muslim ummah split into two. And if you read the books of history, at that point, the Muslims were now divided into two groups. They were known as Shi'at Ali and Shi'at Muawiyah. So the term Shia was also used for the other group, but they were called Shi'at Muawiyah. Now, supposing, because Imam Ali alayhi salam, when he was leaving this world, he appointed Imam Hassan as his successor, and Imam Hassan alayhi salam was the caliph for 6 months. Supposing Muawiyah had not opposed Imam Ali, and the Khilafat would have continued in the descendants of Imam Ali, then to this day, what you would have seen in Islam is there would be one Muslim Ummah, but within that Ummah there would have still existed an elite group that would have been pointed out as those who closely follow Amir al-Mu'mineen, and they are the Shia. But they would not be a separate group. But what happened was, when the Umayyads took the Khilafat, they severely opposed Amir al-Mu'mineen. They began cursing him from pulpits, and they began forging ahadith against him. And they marginalized and put aside the Shia and identified them as renegades and said, these are heretics, this is a heterodoxy, these are the Rafidi. And so now they became mainstream Islam, and those who followed Ali now, who refused to accept that, they became the outcasts. Yes, there were other groups that broke away, like the Kharijites and so on. But you can see what has happened here. And in this political game, a lot of times it's all about marketing and labeling. If you label someone with something, they immediately detach themselves from it, and now they take on, if they can't detach themselves from it, they take on that label. So for example, if you speak against Zionism, and they label you and say anti-Semite, now that's a label in itself. If you're not smart enough to see that, you don't want to be called anti-Semite, isn't it? So you will do anything to show yourself as not being anti-Zionist, because you don't want that label. And so people will create these things like, he's a homophobic, or he's Islamophobic, or he's this phobic and that phobic. And we don't like these terms. So now these terms came about. These are ghulu, these is, munafiqun, these are the breakaway sects, these are Majus, these are Rafidi, these are this and these are that. And then to again cement their position, over time, these titles changed from Shi'at Muawiyah, it became Ahlus Sunnah, and then it expanded and became Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and so on and so forth. But as I said, it is not that all the Sunni Muslims necessarily agreed with what Muawiyah preached, or what Harun al-Rashid did, or what Mutawakkil did. But when you live in a society, in a government, you go with the flow. You don't really oppose it. And this is how the majority came to follow that one path. It is because for the longest time, Muslims were ruled by tyrants and dictators. But that does not mean the majority is right, nor does it mean that the minority who voiced their opinion and opposed these tyrants are wrong. And so when we search for Orthodox Islam, we must not judge it on the basis of majority, or play with words and labels of saying, how did the word Shia come about and how did the word Sunni come about. If you can recite the salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. I think I have run out of my time for tonight, so we will stop here for tonight. And what we will now begin doing from tomorrow night, inshallah, is we will now begin discussing some of these contentious issues and saying, what are the things and reasons for which the Shias are seen as being a heterodoxy? What are the things that we are opposed for and said, you are not Muslims? The Shias curse the Sahaba, the Shias, practice mut'ah, the Shias do this and the Shias do that, and all these things that are contentious, we'll very quickly review them, brief them, and then once we have done that, we are now in a better position to separate the lies from the facts, and then say what are really the fundamental issues on whose basis we should determine where does Orthodox Islam lie. And once we have done that, then for the rest of this ashara, what I will do, inshallah, is take you on a journey from the time of the Prophet ﷺ passing away to the present day Islam. And throughout this journey, as we explore all the different governments and Islamic movements and different ways of rules, we will keep looking at these yardsticks and measures of Orthodox Islam and say, if these had been present, what would have history looked like? And without these, how did history play out? And it will become clear to us as we approach the end, inshallah, that what is it that we are missing as Muslims, and what is it we need to do to change our plight, inshallah, if you can recite as-salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.